My name's Adam. If you don't know me, I'm one of the pastors here at City on a Hill. It's beautiful to kind of see all of your faces a little bit. Is everybody awake? No? So here's the deal. I really like engagement when I preach. Like it's a thing that I want to see people nodding and smiling and amening and and the joy box thing. Yeah, still won't do it. But I got to have engagement, so I'm going to need everybody to kind of pep up a little bit. I think I killed all the coffee before y'all got here, so there may only be weak sauce coffee, which is decaf, by the way. If you haven't been here before, that's not like halved coffee, it's just decaf. I hope we didn't trick anybody into a really long night. Just be honest about it. So here's the deal. I want to share just a little bit about my story. It's only one fraction of it, but it ties into the sermon. We're in Exodus chapter 23, and we'll start in verse 20 for those of you who want to pull up your phones and text and Facebook and tweet while I'm preaching. But I was in the military between 2003 and 2007, right during Operation Iraqi Freedom and then Operation Enduring Freedom. I served over in Misawa, Japan, a high deployment base, and then I served with the NSA at Fort Meade. And while I was over in Japan, I served under the Joint Special Operations Command, which is kind of interesting and kind of cool. One of the things that's interesting about that is our sergeant, or our command sergeant, his name was Mac. Now, Taylor asked me the other day what his first name was, and I think it was Michael Mac, but all we knew it as Mac, Sergeant Mac. And Sergeant Mac may have been one of the most influential men in my life. In fact, they were going to kick Sergeant Mac out of the United States Air Force, a highly decorated sergeant, because he wanted nothing to do with rank. He just wanted to lead his squadron and do what he did, and he wanted nothing to do with paperwork. He wanted nothing to do with any of it except the 6 to 8 gentlemen who were in his squad. And one of the things that I can still remember most about Mac is that he would reiterate things over and over and over again. And when you're like 18, 19, 20 years old, you're like, bro, I've heard this 13 times, man. Why do you got to keep telling me? And it was things like adapt and overcome. It was things like the mission matters. Always remember what the bigger mission is. He would say things that would continually be brought up. And so when we were in high-stress situations, we would hear Mac in our head. Look, slow down, be precise, know what you're doing. Who's talking? Because in that situation, a lot of times you hear a lot of crosstalk over your comms. And so people are giving positions, they're giving orders, they're moving around. Ours was a little unique because we only operated with ourselves and maybe several other people, but it wasn't like a huge battlefield, so I'm not going to paint the picture we were in that. We were a small tactical unit. And so you got really good at hearing that voice. What's your situational report? Where are you at? What are you doing? And if you've been with us in Exodus this last 2 months or so, 2 months, engagement, see, we're working on the engagement thing, right? About 2 months ago, it seems as if God is continually repeating himself over and over and over again. It's almost as if he's developing his community. He wants you to hear his voice. He wants you to be reminded of those things that Josh prayed about, that we sang about, that you hear over and over and over again. It's why Tim and I preach the same sermon every time we get up here. Oh, you thought we were clever. No, same sermon every time, just a little bit different. And so as we get into Exodus chapter 23. And I'm going to be real honest, I'm working on a new tablet. This will be the third tablet since I've been here because I opened up my tablet that I usually preach on today and it was dead. Technology's the worst. It's ridiculous. You can laugh at that as y'all are on your phones like, not mine. I charged mine before I left, bro. So Exodus chapter 23. Moses is writing, and God says this. He says, "Behold, I send an angel before you to guard you on the way and to bring you to the place that I have prepared." So this angel is talking to Israel. We're getting into, they're moving towards this land that was promised to them. A few weeks ago, Tim had kind of shown us a map of how long it was going to take. It should have been like a 3 or 4 day journey, but God is going to make this a long time. We're going to walk through land of all of the enemies of God, and we're going to hear all of the ites names, the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Canaanites. But before he brings us into the land of the enemy, before he makes us sojourners in a foreign land, he gives us an angel. Now, there's a lot of theologian speculation on who this angel is. But further down in the passage, we find out that this angel forgives sins. Now, here's your turn. Who forgives sins in the Bible? Is it the angels? Nope. Men? No. The devil? No. It's Jesus. And so we see Jesus is our first encounter. And so I really want to get a picture of what an angel would look like. So a lot of times when we think about angels, we think about the chubby little angel, with like the bow, the Cupid angel. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Like the Valentine's angel. In my notes, I said it was like the dude with the beer at Jeffco on 4th of July with like the tank top on that's a little bit too short. Y'all know what I'm talking about? All right, so 4th of July, everyone here is invited to come to the Jefferson County 4th of July big party thing in Arnold. It's fantastic. You'll know exactly what I'm saying. You'll be like, that's the angel. I know that guy. That's not what it is. Every time in the Bible we see the angel, we can think of, somebody who's a little bit tougher, a little bit bigger, strikes a little bit fear. And so we get this angel, and God gives us 2 promises. 2 things to think about as we go. So Jesus is there, and he says, Jesus is there to guard you on the way. And for us, this should spark some understanding, as we've talked about last week at Matthew 28:18 to the end of the chapter. Behold, I am with you forever and always. I'm here. And so from the very beginning, God has said, look, I'm going to send you on an impossible mission into a foreign land in which you are going to be a sojourner or just someone who's passing through. But I am here, and I am with you. So point number 1, Jesus is there to guard you. And then point number 2, if we remember, it says that Jesus is preparing the place, and he's bringing you to it. So the ramifications for us as a people of that are drastic. I'm supposed to stay under the light. The ramifications are drastic. Because if that is true, then everywhere we go, it's a place that God is preparing for us. In fact, if we're going to take it to its logical conclusion, everywhere we go and everything that we do, God has planned for it. And so that means there's nothing meaningless in our lives. And so when you wake up in the morning, God has prepared that morning ritual for you. When you drive down to work and you're on 270, God has prepared that time for you. When you get to work, it's not just going to work to do the worky things that you do. God has planned it and he's prepared it. And if this is true, if this is a reality for us as a church, and we've talked about this before, right? Yep, come on. Engagement. If this is true, then that would change everything, every way that we think. It would change how we interact. In fact, when Paul calls us to pray continuously in Ephesians, all of a sudden that doesn't seem like such a massive deal. Because with each transition, with each switch, everywhere we go, if God is really preparing it and we're sojourners and He has a plan and Jesus is going before us, that would mean that God has sent us into a mission and all of a sudden we have something to do. See, just like Mac, who was not God, by the way, but just like Mac had a mission and he would continue to tell us, here's the mission in which we're going to do, and we need to slow down, be prepared, be precise, know what you're doing. God continually tells those same things to you. He says, I'm here, I'm with you, I'm preparing this. And we're going to find out that God fights your battles. He becomes the one who defeats your enemies later on in the passage. And in fact, as we go, we're going to find out it's the blood of the Lamb which ultimately propels us to go in there, the forgiveness of sins. The one who has forgiven those sins, that is Jesus. And that seems to be the running theme through all of Exodus, right? And so what are some of the practical things that we can do in our lives today that as we go out and as we encounter the Jebusites and the Hittites and the Canaanites of this world, those who do not belong to God, what is God doing? Are we praying in the Spirit? God, whose heart are you moving in when you go to work? I know a lot of times that's not my heart. I go to work and I sit down. I usually get a cup of water and a cup of coffee. And I sit in front of my 3 big monitors. And I start pecking away at the keyboard because I got things to do. But God is doing things in the hearts of the people around you. And you need not be scared because Jesus is with you forever and always. So this defeats a lot of the fear in our hearts. This should move us into an excitement. It's just our reality. And so verse 21, we continue to go on. He says, pay careful attention to Him and obey His voice. Do not rebel against Him, for He will not pardon your transgressions, for my name is in Him. But if you carefully obey His voice and do all that He says, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. So this is what we call a kingly covenant. So there are a lot of covenants in the Bible. This is a king and a vassal covenant. It's the king saying, if you do this, I will do that. So this was something that happened all the time. The king would say, if you go out and you make my money and you tend to my fields, then I will give you food and shelter, and I will make sure that the rest of the guys that are trying to come in and steal, I'll give you protection. And so this is a great time to bring up a little point about the Bible, because this covenant isn't for you, and it isn't for you, and it isn't for you, and it's not for me. It's a covenant with a time scope. It's a covenant in which God is saying, this is a covenant for you during this time. If you listen to my voice, and if you obey the things that I do, then I'm going to do these things, like send hornets into your enemies. And I'm going to slowly dissipate all of them away, and you're going to continue to move forward, and this is going to be a process. So today, we don't look at this covenant and we say, hey, this one's for us. Because the reality is the Bible's not a story primarily for us. It's not primarily about us. It's a story about God and His people. It's a story about a king and his bride, one that is faithful and the other that's not. And soon you're going to hear a spoken word poetry in which the young lady who comes up here and talks about this is going to hear about how we've been brought into the story of God by the blood of Jesus, and how His story starts to weave in and our stories start to weave in, and all of a sudden we become part of the greater story, which is the Bible. But it's important to us as we read the Bible, if I can just teach for a second, that when we're reading the Bible, it's not about us primarily. It's about God and His glory. And so I thought that was an interesting point, that covenant, although we can see that it points to a greater covenant, because throughout all of the Bible, we find out that God is for us, right? That He's going to be an enemy to our enemies and an adversary to our adversaries. But this isn't the covenant for us. This is just a pointer to the greater new covenant. And then we go on. Verse 23. And when my angel goes before you and brings you to the Amorites and the Hittites and the Perizzites and the Canaanites and the Hivitites and the Jebusites, I will blot them out. It's a pretty strong statement. We're going to go there. I'm going to blot them out. No longer. And you shall not bow down to the gods nor serve them, nor do as they do, but you shall utterly overthrow them and break the pillars into pieces. You shall serve the Lord your God, and He will bless your bread and your water, and will take away sickness away from among you. What this verse is saying is that God is going to go for you, and there's not a whole lot that you're going to do, but God is going to defend you, but I'm going to send you out, and I'm going to send you into this world, much like God has called us, His people, into the world. And at this point in time, they see pillars and actual statues of the idols. But for today, what God is saying is, as we go into the world, you're going into the world, but you're not going to be of the world. Because the world has many idols. The world has many things that are going to catch your attention and catch your eye. And many of those things are good things, gifts that God has given you. But the reality is we as sinful people, as people who have been clothed by God but are not God, have been given righteousness but are not righteous, will turn good things into idols. See, our natural hearts want to take good things and turn them bad. We want to make them the ultimate thing instead of looking to the ultimate thing that is Jesus. And so in this war that God seemingly put Israel through, He's also calling us into the same type of battle. But this isn't necessarily a battle against the Hittites or the Canaanites or those who don't know Jesus in Arnold or northern Jefferson County. The battle that God's calling us into today is the battle against sin. This isn't a namby-pamby, hey, come in and God loves you and everything will be okay kind of message. Although it's absolutely true. This is a message in which God is calling you onto the battlefield of the sin in your own lives, and there is going to be some grace-filled effort in which you're going to have to produce. You're going to have to listen to what God is speaking, what the Spirit is moving, and you're actually going to have to put some skin in the game in which you say, I'm waging war on sin. It's retaliatory. The idols in my life are not going to continue to reign. I am going to fight back in the power of Jesus as the Spirit comes, and we're going to see that God, the devouring flame, at the end of this passage. But the reality is today, in the battle, Satan has a whole lot to do. There's absolutely spiritual warfare. But in the Western culture, I don't think Satan has to do a whole lot. I I think the reality is as soon as we step outside of the walls of this building, as soon as we get into our cars and we see the Teslas go by, as soon as we go down to the next door neighbor and see that they've got a new boat or a new camper, as soon as we go home and the dishes aren't done and our expectations aren't met, as soon as our kids don't act the way we expect them to act, as soon as we look at our bank accounts and we start to worry about whether we can make the next bill or how much money we have in savings, as soon as any of those things happens and starts to take away the joy in our lives, it starts to become a consuming passion, passion that is only for God. We will run to that as an idol, and it will absolutely fail us every time. And just as Israel goes into the Canaanites and the Hittites, God is going to point this out in verse 32. He says, you shall make no covenant with them and their gods. For us, that's the Teslas, not the 3s, because that was a bust. The Tesla's 2s. Y'all don't follow Tesla? Big bust on... All right, so that one landed short. Never mind. Apparently geeky. Good. My one geek in here knows what I'm talking about. Wasn't totally flat. 32, he says, you shall make no covenant with them and their gods. In Jefferson County, that's your bass boats and your RVs and your trucks. Is that better? You guys get that one? That make sense? Okay. They shall not dwell in your land unless they make you sin against me. For if you serve their gods, it will surely be a snare to you. See, this is the problem with the Western church and what we've come to term as the Christendom that has come over the past 150 years. Is we have taken all of these different things and we've turned them into gods and we've made them idols. Biggest idol I see right now currently and where I'm at is politics. Whether you're a Republican or whether you're a Libertarian or whether you're a liberal or whether you're this or that. We expose our idols all over the place. Tim talked about this last week, our exposing idols all over our social networks. What we talk about most is what we idolatrize, what is the idol in our hearts. What becomes the idolatry. It's a good self-test. What is the idol in our hearts? What do I talk about most? So if you look at my Snapchat, or not my Snapchat, my Instagram. You go on, you follow me on Instagram. Do you know what you're going to find? You're going to find food. That's right. That's not an idolatry. That's just a reality. You're going to see my egg, maybe an idolatrous issue, but you're going to see pictures of my kids. You're going to see pictures of my wife. You would see pictures of my new toys when I get them. I just haven't got them yet. We're going to work on that, right? But these are all things that are consuming. But if they become a god in my life and they disappoint me, and I make a covenant with them that you're going to bring me joy and you're going to bring me happiness and you're going to be my everything and my ultimate for all eternity, it's going to become a snare. Every time you get in a fight with your spouse, guess what? Idolatry is coming out. Every time that you get up and you go to your job and you go, man, I hate my job, I'm not doing this anymore. There's a hint of idolatry in there. Every time you drive down the road and you see the big Ford F-150 or whatever cool truck, it's idolatrous. And they become a snare to our joy. Right? I mean, anybody who's a parent knows that when you walk in the door, you want your son to come running to you, your arms with a big hug and kiss you on the face. And then when he runs by you and he slams on the door and he runs back the other way and you're like, wait, but I wanted you. Come love me. And then you pick him up and he starts screaming, put me down. And that's a little broken piece of your heart. You know what I'm talking about. Anytime you've come home and you had an expectation that something was supposed to be done and it wasn't, and you flew off in a fit of rage, you were looking for something that wasn't there. You set an expectation. That's not a one-off for not doing your chores and getting things done. What I'm showing is this idolatrous way. And so God, a long time ago, to the Israelites said, look, these gods that they're worshiping, they're going to be a snare to you because they will fail. Because they're fake. Like nobody's worshiping this cow that's ever given us hope and joy, but we're funny like that. Because we'll laugh at Aaron shortly when he brings out the golden calf. Be like, why are you worshiping that? And then turn around and worship something in the next heartbeat. Nothing is new. And God is perfect and He is ultimate. Exodus 24, verse 3. And Moses came out and he told the people all the words of the Lord and all of the rules. And all of the people answered with one voice, all the words that the Lord has spoken we will do. We've heard that before, right? Last week? Liars. Verse 4, and Moses wrote down the words of the Lord, and he rose early in the morning, and he built an altar at the foot of the mountain and 12 pillars, according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young men, the people of Israel, who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. They had the green egg out, just to make this point. And Moses took half of the blood and put it in the basins, and half of the blood he threw against the altar. And he took the book of the covenant and he read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do, and we will be obedient. And Moses took the blood and threw it on the people and said, behold, the blood of the covenant the Lord has made with you in accordance to these words. Now, I don't know about you, but those little we do's, and we will do that, and we will obey. See? It's a lie. That's like in college when you woke up next to the porcelain god and you said, I'm never doing that again. I was being honest. They really believed that they were going to listen and they were going to obey. There was going to be a reality in which they could be gods. Wait, Genesis 1, does anybody hear that? We can do this. We'll obey you. We'll do the things. And what does Moses do? But he takes the blood of the offerings and he sprinkles it over the people. Because just as Exodus 24 points us to Jesus, we have to recognize that we can say, we will do, we will obey, we will work, we will try everything. But the reality is the covenant in which God has covenanted with us. The one who is able to listen and the one who is able to obey. He was the one whose blood that was sprinkled over us, poured over us in His righteousness. Because they couldn't keep the covenant. That's the point of the book. I'm glad somebody thought it was funny. You couldn't keep the covenant. It's the point of the book. All 66 books of the Bible all point to this one thing, that no matter how hard you try, no matter how good of a person you are, no matter what you have, what you earn, what your job title is, no matter what pedigree you are, or whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you can't keep the covenant. Because you are ultimately the unfaithful bride. But just as we look at the covenant with the king and his vassal, and the vassal is expected to do the thing, our king knew that the vassal would never be able to do it. And so in an absolute scandal of grace, He said, I will fulfill the covenant. And not just I will fulfill the covenant, but I will fulfill the covenant for you and bring in the family. And in this culture, that was scandalous. The king was not to be stepped so lowly. And then if we skip down to verse 15, I'll end. Then Moses went up to the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain, and the glory of the Lord dwelt on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days. And on the seventh day he called out Moses in the midst of the cloud. Now the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a devouring fire on the top of the mountain in the sight of the people of Israel. And Moses entered the cloud, and he went up on the mountain. And Moses was in the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. So I want you to envision this. Mount Sinai, and there's like a fire, a devouring fire. Moses goes up there for 40 days and 40 nights. For those of us who know our Bibles, what does that sound like? Oh, Jesus, 40 days and 40 nights, right? Flood, we could run with that. What about that fire part? What else showed up like a fire? Spirit, Pentecost. See, we found out that God is with His people here, but they have to carry the tabernacle around with them over and over again, right? They've got to move it into their camp, and that's where the Spirit of the Lord dwells. But we find out in Pentecost that God is over the top of the apostles, and upon baptism, because of what Jesus did on the cross, that we're indwelled with the God that was protecting Israel from the Hittites and the Canaanites. That we're no longer bound by an encampment. We're no longer bound by having to go around a tabernacle. In fact, we are the tabernacle. We are the indwelling of the Spirit, going amongst the people in which God has prepared and He's called us. He's given us the power. See, when I say we're going to wage war against sin, it's not you're going to do it and pick up your bootstraps. It's the Spirit of God indwells in you. And He's already said He's going to blot out the Hittites and the Canaanites. And He's going to break the idols that are in you. He's already promised that the battle is won. See, in the military, you're not promised that the battle is won. You step onto the battlefield and you just hope and pray you make it the next day. But in this battle, the battle against sin, the mission in which God calls you, He's already won the victory. Waging war against sin is nothing but turning towards God and saying, God, you've promised. And I'm here and I'm faithful and I'm obedient and I'm listening and I will fail and I will falter, but you won't. Because our God is a God of devouring fire. Our God doesn't accept idols. Our God breaks the back of idols. Our God goes in front of us. Our God has been with us forever from the very beginning. This is the reality, Christian. And there's too many times in which we sit around like namby-pamby Christians going, why can't I be joyful? And why are all the things in my life not working well? And why can't I get the better job? And where's my F-150? Here's the reality is God has already blessed you with everything on heaven and on earth. And so when God says He blesses your bread and He blesses your water, He blesses that not only in the times in which you have abundance, but He blesses that in the times where you have little. And is your life not greater than that of the sparrows? Will God not provide? And in this reality, we are geared up for the battle of life in which we live as sojourners in an absolutely sinful and idol-filled world. And we can boldly proclaim the cross of Christ because He's defeated the sin in our heart, brought joy to our lives, and an everlasting commitment in a covenant. This is the reality. And so I urge you and I beg and I plead with you is that as you go on with your lives, don't believe that this is a mundane waste of a day or a minute or a second. Because God has prepared it. And He's prepared you, and He's indwelt you with the Spirit, and He's brought forth the power of an almighty God who created the heavens and the earth. And then He did what no man could do. He fulfilled the covenant. He let lowly men, He let the vessels put Him on a cross. And He died a death that we deserved. And He was resurrected on the third day so that we may have life.